Hello, my dear friends. Tonight we will embark on a journey that is both sacred and merciless, a subject that every woman living in the Middle Ages had to face at least a few times in her life: childbirth. A moment that we today consider miraculous, but for people of the past, it was the fragile border between life and death. So before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe so I know I always have you accompanying me. And if you're watching this video from a small corner of the world, please leave a comment to let me know your location and local time. Now then, turn off the lights, wrap yourself in a warm blanket, and let us step into tonight's journey gently. Welcome to one of the harshest chapters in the life of a medieval woman, a place where childbirth was not a sacred glowing moment like in the films, but more like a test of survival imposed by fate, and women were thrown into it with no right to choose. In an age where medicine was still several hundred years away from being remotely reliable, and faith was stronger than reason, being pregnant was the equivalent of signing a contract with death. If you were lucky, you lived. If you were not, your family prepared for the funeral. Maternal mortality rates in the Middle Ages were so high that they would make a modern person feel faint. From 1 in 10 to as many as 1 in 3 women did not survive childbirth. Just try to imagine those numbers in a small village. Out of every 10 adult women, 1 to 3 would never return to their hearth, their table, or their yard. And no one in the community saw that as unusual. It was accepted as an obvious part of life, just like bitter winters or sudden outbreaks of disease. What is more striking is that society at the time had an explanation that was astonishingly simple, yet absolutely believed. Labour pain is Eve's punishment. Because Eve ate the forbidden fruit, her descendants, specifically you, had to suffer in childbirth. A piece of theology that was neat, convenient, and ensured that every scream in the birthing room was seen as according to procedure. And men, they were exempt from that pain, and sometimes quite comfortable repeating this theory, as if they were sharing some precious piece of information. When you went into labour, you had no painkillers, no doctor, and certainly no ultrasound to tell you whether the baby was in the right position. What you had was faith, courage, and a quiet dread that stretched over 9 months. In a small wooden house with the winter wind slipping through the cracks in the door, everyone knew that a single complication, a breech birth, hemorrhage, infection, was enough to end a life. Yet the irony was that women were rarely allowed to speak openly about that fear. You were expected to prepare yourself mentally by praying, and praying a lot. Priests of the time often repeated that labour pain was natural, that it was as it should be, that it was proof of humility before God. Those words might make modern listeners want to stand up and protest, but for you, they were the only form of guidance offered. In the final months before birth, those around you began to prepare. Not to prepare a hospital or an ambulance, but to prepare their minds. Family members would help arrange the birthing room, the midwife would come to check herbs, and women from around the village would gather to assist or to witness. Your birthing room was nothing like the white, sterile rooms of today. It was cramped, hot, dim, and considered a space cut off from the world where fate would be decided. You stepped into that room, a place filled with warmth, with heavy breathing, and attention stretched tight as a drawn bow. Older women murmured to each other. The midwife prepared cords, cloths, hot water, and a few herbs. The weapons considered essential for this battle. And your husband? He was forbidden from entering, left standing outside the door to wait. Wait for what? Either the cry of a newborn, or the cries of your family if things went wrong. As terrifying as it was, medieval people did not give up. Women became pregnant again and again because it was their duty to continue the family line and sustain the village. But beneath that sense of duty lay countless silent stories. Some women gave birth 8 times and were lucky enough to live long enough to see their children grow up. Some died at the very first birth. There were mothers whose only trace left to us today is a faint line in a family record. Died in childbirth. And yet, out of this darkness, we see the astonishing strength of medieval women. Even though they were bound by strict religious beliefs and forced to live with risks almost unimaginable today, they still chose to walk into childbirth with a calmness and determination that is hard to grasp. There were no flowers, no soft music, no cheerful wishes of both mother and baby safe. Only silence, resilience, and a courage that no epic poem can fully capture. In the journey of childbirth in the Middle Ages, fear never disappeared, but you had to learn how to live alongside it. You knew you might die, but you went on. You knew the pain would be dreadful, but you accepted it. And you knew that every child born was a small light in a dark age, a tiny victory of life, however fragile. And so, right at that beginning point, in darkness, in faith, in fear, in a destiny you did not choose, medieval women wrote the most powerful story of their own lives, the story of bringing life into a world that was constantly threatening to take it away. In the small medieval village where you live, there is a woman whom the entire community respects in a very particular way. Neither a noblewoman nor a nun, but the midwife. When night falls and the groans of a labouring woman rise from the far end of the village, the first name people call is not God's nor the priest's, but hers. It is as if the lives of both mother and child are placed neatly inside her basket of herbs, and in the hands that have grown accustomed to guiding life through the narrow threshold between living and dying. In your era, where there is no medical school, no license to practice, a midwife's knowledge does not come from books but from life itself. Previous births, successful deliveries, heartbreaking failures that no one blamed her for, yet no one ever forgot. All of these wove together into experience, passed from mother to daughter, from the old to the young, a legacy no church could control and no man dared to interfere with. She steps into the birthing room with a calmness so steady that everyone else in the house breathes a little easier. There is no white coat, no gleaming instruments, only a leather pouch containing a small knife, thread and needle, clean cloths, and bundles of herbs tied with hemp string. Under the flickering lamplight, these objects look at once humble and frightening, for they may save a life, or be the last things a woman sees if things take a wrong turn. The midwife possesses a rare kind of authority. She is the only woman in the village who can give orders while men wait outside the door. When the screams intensify, when the room grows suffocating like a cramped furnace, whatever she says, everyone obeys. Bring hot water, hold the mother's hands, burn the herbs, pray to Saint Margaret, and you can clearly see that no one dares argue, not even the husband hovering helplessly, unsure where to place his feet. But that authority is fragile. One failed birth, something tragically common in an age of poor hygiene and no medicine, and she might become the one people fear, then the one they accuse, then the witch, especially between the 15th and 17th centuries, when Europe plunged into the era of witch hunts. Midwives became one of the most suspected groups. Many English, German and French witch trial records describe midwives accused of killing children in the womb. Some even state outright charges such as The midwife used sorcery to place a demon spirit into the infant. No evidence needed, only rumours, a signature feature of the society you know too well, where whispers travel faster than winter fevers. Even so, the midwife continues her work, because if she stops, who will save the women walking into the valley of life and death? The church will not. The men will not. The healers usually appear only once the baby has already taken its first cry. Thus, she becomes one of the few figures upon whom both community and fear depend. Respected and mistrusted in equal measure, she works with a strange serenity. Sometimes she places her hands on the mother's belly, gently turning, murmuring encouragements that are never dramatic. When the pain peaks, she mixes herbs with a little wine, giving it to the mother to ease her suffering, though you know well this anesthetic is only marginally stronger than warm water, and in that moment, in the confusion of cries, sweat, and the smell of herbs, you sense something profoundly admirable, the ability to remain steady while life stands inches from death. And then the crucial moment comes. If everything goes well, a baby's cry rings out, and the tension dissolves as if an invisible weight has been lifted from the room. The midwife wipes the newborn, wraps it in rough cloth and hands it to the mother, a moment no hymn could ever fully capture. But if silence follows, every gaze turns to her, and she understands. Medieval life does not allow failure without consequence. Some midwives were burned at the stake simply for doing their job. Others were accused of sorcery. A few were luckier, merely banished from the village. Those who remained, like the woman now standing before you, continued their work with a bravery few today can imagine. In an era where women were bound by countless rules, the midwife held a power that moved against the current. She decided how a birth unfolded, she protected mothers, she carried knowledge no priest or male healer possessed. But that very power made her an easy target in a world where anything inexplicable was labelled the work of the devil. And finally, as you watch her lift her bag and leave the house, her silhouette shrinking along the dark dirt path, you understand that her existence is a paradox, respected and feared. The community's only hope, yet its sacrificial victim when fate turned cruel. But one thing cannot be denied. In a world filled with darkness and dread, the midwife is the small flame that keeps life burning. No glory, no titles, only a pair of steady hands quietly fighting death, again and again. When the contractions begin to tighten around your abdomen, you're taken into a small room inside the house, a place every medieval woman knows, and one she may fear even more than walking into the marriage hall. This is not merely a bedroom or a resting place. From the moment the door is pulled shut, it becomes a sacred space, a second womb that the whole family painstakingly prepares, as if trying to recreate the place from which the child is about to emerge. The wooden door closes, and the latch clicks with a tiny but heavy sound. Not to preserve privacy. That concept hardly exists in your time, but to keep out the wind. Wind is considered the first enemy of a woman in labour, the carrier of poisonous air, bad winds, and every other misfortune medieval imagination could assign to it. They believe that if even a small draught enters the birthing room, the mother may develop a fever, fall into delirium, or have her soul blown away. The tiny window in the room is covered with a thick curtain, usually wool or animal hide. The light that filters in is just enough to see the midwife preparing her tools. The darkness is not for ambience. It stems from the medieval belief that strong light can exhaust the woman or awaken evil spirits within the house. A reason that sounds whimsical, but in an age without science, anything can be considered truth. You are placed on the bed, though not the soft, padded beds of modern times. A straw mattress is laid thick, topped with a worn woolen cloth. Its scent is earthy, slightly musky, yet warmer than any mattress you've ever known. Inside this cramped room, the smell of straw mixes with the scent of herbs burning in a clay bowl, forming a distinct fragrance, the smell of childbirth in the Middle Ages. Around the room, rosemary, mugwort and pine resin hang in bundles tied with hemp string. They are believed to drive away demons and prevent wicked spirits from lurking during this moment of life and death. While the modern world might call them aromatics, natural antibacterials, or simply folk beliefs, you, the woman in labour, only know that this is the ritual everyone follows, if only to soothe the heart. The midwife burns a little resin in a small stove. The smoke rises thick and fragrant, clinging to hair and clothing. Even though you're in so much pain that breathing becomes difficult, you still feel a warmth in your chest, not because the resin truly has power, but because every woman before you has gone through the same ritual, and for a moment you no longer feel alone. Your family stands nearby, but not too close. They are silent, almost holding their breath for fear of distracting you. Your mother or sister stands at the head of the bed, placing a hand on your shoulder, offering calm through a light squeeze. No one speaks in comforting platitudes. There is no "you can do it" or "everything will be fine." They know that here, promises of safety are a luxury. All they can do is stand beside you, nothing more. In a corner, a priest may sometimes be invited to read a short prayer, but he must leave immediately afterwards, because men are forbidden from witnessing the birth. He places a small cross on the table and closes the door. From that moment on, the room becomes a realm belonging only to women, where they face fate with their hands, their breath, and a resilience greater than that of any warrior on a battlefield. The room is now lit only by a candle burning low into its last wax, but it is not cold. The closed curtains, burning resin, and the collective breath of the people inside raise the temperature just enough. You begin to feel hotter, more uncomfortable, and the room becomes, in every sense, a second womb. Dark, warm, humid, enclosed, and full of the breath of a life struggling to be born. Occasionally the midwife murmurs a few short instructions to adjust your posture or prepare you for a stronger contraction. No shouting, no urgency. She speaks in a low, firm voice that makes the room feel smaller, focused entirely on one task, guiding a child into the world. You notice that everyone stands in a strangely deliberate arrangement. No one turns their back to the door. No one stands against the wall where light might fall, but instead they stay slightly to the side so as not to block the path for the child's soul. They believe that at the moment the baby enters the world, anything, from demons to wandering spirits, might try to slip in. Such beliefs may sound absurd, but in your time, no one found them unusual. Childbirth is the most fragile moment in a woman's life, and also the moment when, according to their belief, the world beyond seems close enough to touch. Through the pain, you see the candlelight flicker on the wall, casting the shadow of the midwife bending over to check the baby's progress. Every sound becomes sharp, water dripping in a stone pot, fabric rustling, rapid breathing. This small room holds you tightly, as if trying to guard life on behalf of the heavens. Then the moment arrives. A small, thin but piercing cry. Cutting through the thick curtains, the resin smoke, and even the fear clenched around your chest. The room loosens. The light seems brighter, and the hands gripping you relax slightly. The midwife places the baby in your arms, the scent of resin still lingering like a blessing, and in that instant, you understand why medieval people called the birthing chamber the second womb. Because everything in this room, the darkness, the warmth, the herbs, the taut silence, exists solely to help life pass through the narrowest doorway of fate. When the waves of labour begin to tighten in your belly, the midwife leads you towards what she calls the birthing chair, an object no one in the modern world would dare place in their home, let alone sit on. It is a heavy wooden chair with a round hole carved right in the middle, like a medieval version of a chair missing the most important part. But in your time, it is considered a brilliant invention. The midwife places her hand on your shoulder and guides you to sit. The birthing chair allows you to use gravity to help bring the baby down, an idea that sounds logical, but the experience is anything but pleasant. In the flickering candlelight, the chair looks both honest and frightening, and you know that hundreds of women have sat exactly where you are sitting, experiencing the same fear, the same screams, and the same fragile hope held together by breath alone. Beside the birthing chair, the midwife opens her worn leather bag. Inside is the birthing kit you've heard about since childhood, but have never seen with your own eyes until now. Nothing inside is made of shining steel or sterile stainless steel like in modern clinics. Everything is forged iron, a small knife with a slightly chipped edge, rough metal clamps, curved needles sharpened by hand against stone. Each object looks like it belongs more on a battlefield than in a birthing room. Yet this is all you have, and all the medieval world has. Every tool is both hope and danger. A knife can free a trapped baby, but it can also open the door to infection. The needle can mend a tear, but in a world without antiseptics or antibiotics, every stitch is a gamble. Before anything begins, the midwife gives you the era's version of anesthesia, mead mixed with herbs. The herb could be mandrake, a root believed to ease pain but capable of sending you floating somewhere between dreams and the voices of your ancestors. Or it could be henbane, half sedative, half poison, clouding your mind just enough to dull the pain for a moment, but also strong enough to make you ramble nonsense. You take a few small sips. The honeyed sweetness mixed with the bitterness of herbs slides down your throat. It does not ease the pain as promised, but at least it distracts you from the reality that you are about to face the most brutal battle of your life, armed with nothing but a handful of crude tools. Then the contraction comes again. The little wooden house seems to tremble, as if the walls themselves know what is happening. The midwife places her hand on your belly, gently turning it to help the baby into the right position, and you, sitting on the birthing chair, legs trembling from both pain and terror, hear the faint clink of metal. She's preparing the tools you pray she will not need to use. When the baby's head appears, the midwife bends down, checking with her calloused but steady hands. But babies do not always arrive most simply. Shoulders may get stuck, the cord may be wrapped around the neck, the head may be angled wrongly, and every one of these must be solved with the very tools resting inside that leather bag. Not with machines, not with modern equipment, but with the hands of one woman and a few pieces of old iron. The harsh truth is, one wrong movement can end 2 lives. The midwife works in dim candlelight, her shadow on the wall looking like a warrior locked in battle with fate. She moves as gently as she can, not because she is weak, but because she knows each motion could draw the line between a newborn's cry and deadly silence. You, blinded by pain and tears, no longer care what you see. But you hear the sounds clearly. The knife placed on the table, the needle clinking softly against the bowl, and you know that anything could happen tonight. No antibiotics, no real disinfectant, no sterile gauze. Any small tear can lead to infection, and infection often means death. This is why every tool in a medieval birthing room carries such immense weight. They are not only instruments of rescue, but also silent witnesses to both survival and failure. Between contractions, you hear the midwife whispering to the older woman nearby. Not panic. Instructions. Hold her shoulders. Bring the cloth. Burn more resin. All spoken in a calm, low voice, making you feel as though you're inside a sacred ritual, not standing on the thinnest edge between life and death. Then a cry. Sharp. Clear. Stronger than any flame in the room. The midwife lifts the baby, the tiny red face shining in her hands. She does not cheer, but her eyes glow brighter than the candle. Not pride, not triumph, just deep, profound relief. Another birth survived. The tools returned to the leather bag, waiting for the next time, and the next, and the next. You lie back on the bed, too exhausted to lift your arms, but the room suddenly feels warmer. Not because the resin burns in the corner, but because the baby has cried, meaning the tools saved a life today rather than taking one. In the medieval night, those crude, frightening instruments are all that stand between you and death. And though they are imperfect, even dangerous, they remain the proof of women's will to survive across centuries in small rooms lit by a single trembling candle. Before the first contraction crashes into you like a rough wave, there is a quiet but deeply tense stretch of time, what medieval people called the waiting hour. A fragile moment between calm and chaos, between steady breathing and the storm that is coming. And in an age without hospitals or fetal monitors, these hours were so crucial that they became a ritual in themselves, almost a sacred ceremony that opened the door either to life or at times to death. The midwife sits beside your bed, her eyes accustomed to witnessing this scene hundreds of times. She rubs your back in slow, steady movements, far more comforting than any words. Her hands are calloused from years of doing the most dangerous work a woman could do, work that no one bothered to give a noble title. But when she lays a hand on you, the touch feels almost warm, as though a little courage has been passed down from all the women who've given birth before you. The birthing room has been prepared long before this moment. The window is sealed shut with a thick wooden board. Woolen curtains hang to block the cold wind. The light is dimmed until only a few flickering candles remain, just enough to see one another's faces, but not bright enough to disturb the soul of the unborn child, a belief the people of your time cling to tightly. Sprigs of rosemary, mugwort, and pieces of pine resin hang from the walls, not only to scent the room, but to ward off evil. For long before medicine arrived, medieval people believed childbirth was the moment when a woman's spirit was at its weakest, and demons, spirits, or the darkness from the woods at the edge of the village all lurked waiting for that moment. It sounds superstitious, but in this era, it is the only thing that makes the room feel less terrifying. You are given a bowl of warm herbal water. It is not a painkiller. Such a concept is as distant as a spaceship, but a drink meant to soothe the mind, essentially a mixture of hot water and the strange taste of crushed plants. The midwife says it will make the body softer. Perhaps it does. Perhaps it is simply a comfort women have passed down to each other for centuries. At the far end of the room, an older woman places a pot of hot water on the stove, Steam rises, blending with the herbal scent and forming a thin mist. They believe the warmth helps the baby slide down more easily. A simple explanation, but the closest thing to science you can rely on. And at the very least, it is kinder than giving birth in a room cold as stone. The steam softens the harshness of the air. While everyone prepares, you hear soft prayers. The midwife and 2 other women recite lines dedicated to St. Margaret, the patron saint of women in labour. The prayer is slow, steady, like the heartbeat of someone trying to stay calm in a moment of danger. No one treats faith as optional here. It is the only anchor to hold on to when everything might fall apart. Your husband, of course, is nowhere to be seen. He's been pushed out of the room long ago, not from lack of love, but because society believes a man's presence will invite evil spirits, or, worse, shame the woman and disrupt the birth. He stands just outside the door, listening to every sound. But the wooden door is the final barrier between him and reality. He's allowed to witness only the outcome, never the battle. Time begins to slow. The room becomes a world of its own. Warm, stifling, half sacred and half frightening. The midwife studies your breathing, her hands resting on your belly to guess the baby's position. With no modern equipment, everything depends on inherited knowledge, on the instinct of a woman who has spent her life helping others cross the threshold between life and death. Then the first true contraction arrives, stronger, deeper, like an invisible rope tightening around you. No longer the dull ache from earlier. This is the moment when the room, with its herbs, prayers, curtains and candles, must prove that it truly is a second womb, shielding you from the deadly cold, from the wind, and from the fear of death hanging in the air. Suddenly, everything falls silent. No one jokes. No one whispers. Each person keeps to her role. One woman holds your hand, another adjusts the candlelight, and the midwife breathes deeply as she watches the smallest changes in your body, waiting for this moment. The instant when the world shifts from anticipation to battle is the essence of the waiting hour. You do not know how long it will take, a few hours or an entire day. No one knows. And that is the soft but overwhelming tension of the medieval birthing room. Everyone stands in this long, stretched-out waiting, but no one dares to say it aloud. In that waiting, you realize 2 things with absolute clarity. First, that your body has never felt so fragile, and second, that the women of this era are far stronger than history ever found words to describe. The next contraction comes with no warning. It is no longer a brief sting that makes your body falter for a heartbeat, but a violent wave rolling from your back down into your belly, gathering itself in the place that has been waiting for 9 long months. Candlelight flickers across the dark wall, covered with the shadows of dried herbs, and the small room becomes a warm cave where the breaths of everyone present seem to collide in the narrow space. In that moment you understand why the medieval world described childbirth as a stormy sea crossing. Sometimes the waters are still as glass, but a single strong gust can capsize the boat of a human life at any time. The midwife leans down, her hand pressing onto your belly, tracing the baby's position without any tools other than the experience that has accompanied her for almost her entire life. Her face is focused, rarely revealing emotion, a calmness never taught in books, but forged through countless nights spent confronting life and death in the most literal sense. Around you, a few older women try to keep their breathing steadier than yours. No one speaks loudly, no one moves abruptly. Everyone knows that in this stage, a single question or unnecessary sound can push a woman in pain into panic. The birthing room becomes a world without time, where every uneven breath resounds as clearly as the taut string of a bow just before it is loosed. The next contraction crashes in, harsher, so strong it feels as if an invisible cord is tightening around your spine. You grip the blanket beneath you, feeling its fabric dampen with sweat as heat rises around you, mingling with the scent of herbs, burning wood, and the faint metallic smell of the hot water simmering on the stove. This is not the pristine white room of a modern hospital. This is a soft battlefield where everything is raw, rough, and painfully real. The midwife bends closer. She murmurs a few lines of prayer to St. Margaret, not as comfort, but as a reflex of her craft. In this era, no one believes a woman can survive childbirth through strength alone. Divine protection is required, whether from God, the saints, or the darkness outside the door. The next contraction lasts an eternity, forcing you to curl forward, breath hissing between your teeth. For a moment it feels as though your body no longer belongs to you. It is heavy, tight, exhausted, opening and tearing with every spasm. There is no morphine, no anesthetic gas, no relief except the warmth of the midwife's hand resting on your shoulder. People of this age believe women must endure Eve's childbirth pain, part of a sacred order, a cruel mockery, yet the only explanation draped over this moment. In the dim gold light, your face is slick with sweat. Another woman presses a cloth soaked in hot water to your forehead. The warmth soothes only slightly, just enough to tug you back into the room, back into your own body. Outside the door, the winter wind rattles the wooden roof, as if even the weather is waiting to see how this battle will end. Then the midwife signals that you must push, a movement that sounds simple but is the very border between life and death. The baby is descending, she says, her voice low, practical, gentle, and stripped of all false promises. She does not soothe. She does not embellish. She only guides, separating herself from emotion, dedicated solely to keeping you alive. The room falls utterly silent as your body bears down. A tearing pain blazes through you, scorching, spreading through your hips and climbing your back, a sensation so primal that every instinct screams to flee. But there is nowhere to go. This is the moment later centuries would call the threshold of life and death, the place where more women fell than soldiers on many medieval battlefields. Someone holds your hand, another steadies your knee. The midwife is below, eyes locked on the emerging child. There is no heart rate monitor, no oxygen gauge, only eyes, ears, and experience. A scream tears through the air. You cannot tell if it is yours or someone else's. All you know is that after it the world suddenly stops. Then, a silence so stretched it becomes unbearable. This is the silence every medieval birthing room knows too well. The moment when fate is not determined by machines, but by a breath. A tiny breath from a body that has just touched the edge of life. The midwife reaches in, gentle but decisive. You hear someone praying faster, a clatter of wood. A candle is sputtering. And then, the sound that splits the heavy stillness in two, a cry, faint but clear. It rings out like a crack of light through a wall of darkness, and the entire room exhales in the same instant. Your shoulders drop, tears spill. You don't know whether from pain, relief, or simple exhaustion. The pain hasn't stopped. Your body is still trembling, breath jagged. But this moment, the moment life has won a small victory, is enough to keep you in this world for one more day. When the next contraction comes, without any warning, It is no longer the slight tightening that makes your body freeze for a moment, but a violent wave rolling from your back to your abdomen and gathering at the place that has been waiting for 9 long months. Candlelight flickers against the soot-stained wall, throwing shadows of dried herbs that hang from above, and the small room feels like a warm cave where everyone's breath mingles in the narrow space. In that moment you understand why the medieval world called childbirth a perilous sea crossing. Sometimes the waters are calm, but one strong gust of wind is enough to overturn the boat of a human life at any time. The midwife leans in, her hand placed on your belly, sensing the direction of the child without any tool other than the experience that has accompanied her for most of her life. Her face is focused, almost never revealing emotion, a steadiness that can't be learned from books, shaped instead by long nights spent confronting life and death in their most literal form. Around you, a few older women keep their breathing steadier than yours. No one speaks loudly, no one moves abruptly. Everyone knows that at this stage a single question or unnecessary sound can be enough to send the labouring woman into panic. The birth room becomes a world without time, where each interrupted breath echoes like the sound of a bowstring pulled taut before release. The next contraction crashes down with greater force, so intense that your spine feels as if a rope is being pulled tight around it. You grip the blanket beneath you, feel the fabric damp with sweat, the heat rising and blending with the scent of herbs, wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of the hot water simmering on the hearth. This is not the bright, sterile room of a modern hospital. This is a battlefield of softness, where everything is raw, primitive, and painfully real. The midwife leans closer. She murmurs a few lines in honour of St. Margaret, not so much to soothe you as out of a reflex shaped by her craft. In this era, no one believes a woman can survive childbirth on sheer strength alone. She needs protection from the invisible world, be it God, the saints, or the darkness outside the door. The next contraction lasts unbearably long, forcing you to curl forward as your breath hisses between your teeth. For a moment you feel your body no longer belongs to you. It is heavy, tight, exhausted, and opening with each clench. There is no morphine, no anaesthetic gas, no pain relief of any kind. Only the warmth of the midwife's hand on your shoulder. People of this age believe that women must bear Eve's labour pains, part of a divine order, a cruel explanation, yet the only one that governs this moment. In the candle's yellow glow, your face is slick with sweat. Another woman wipes your forehead with a cloth dipped in hot water. The warmth soothes you slightly, just enough to pull you back into the room, back into your own body. Outside, the wind pushes against the wooden roof, groaning as if even the weather is waiting to see how this battle will end. Then the midwife tells you to push, a simple instruction, yet one that separates life from death. The baby is coming down, she says, her voice low, practical and gentle all at once. She makes no promises, offers no comfort, and speaks no lovely words. There is only instruction, stripped of emotion, focused solely on keeping you alive. The room falls absolutely silent as your body gathers strength. The sensation tearing through you is fierce, hot, radiating through your hips and up your spine. It sparks a primal urge to flee, yet there is nowhere to go. This is the moment historians call the threshold of life and death. The moment where more women fell than on any battlefield of their age. Someone grips your hand, another supports your knees, keeping you steady. The midwife is below, her eyes fixed on the child emerging. No heartbeat monitor, no oxygen gauge, only her eyes, her ears, and her experience. A scream splits the air. You're not sure if it's yours or someone else's, but after that scream, the world suddenly stops. Then, a silence so long it becomes unbearable. It is the moment every medieval birth room knows too well, the instant when fate is measured not by machines, but by breath. A tiny breath from a body just brushing the edge of life. The midwife reaches in, gentle yet decisive. You hear someone praying faster, the clatter of wood, the faint crackle of the candle, and then the first sound that breaks the weight hanging in the air, a cry, weak but clear. It rings out like a fracture of light splitting the wall of darkness, and the entire room exhales in unison. You relax your shoulders, tears slipping down your face. You're not even sure if they come from pain, relief, or sheer exhaustion. The pain hasn't ended. Your body still trembles, your breath still stutters. But that moment, the moment life has won the smallest victory, is enough to anchor you to this world for one more day. The birthing room, after many exhausting hours, had almost lost all its warmth. The candle on the wooden table burned low, its flame wavering whenever the midwife moved. Everyone understood that this moment would decide everything. Either the first cry of a life, or absolute silence. The kind of silence medieval people feared more than the toll of a funeral bell. The mother lay on her side, her clothes soaked with cold sweat. The midwife bent over her, her experienced hands trembling ever so slightly, as though she knew that fate was hanging by the thinnest of threads. And then there came a dreadful stillness, a silence in which all sound vanished. The entire room held only the whisper of wind slipping through the roof beams, a sound so cold it raised goosebumps on your skin. In the modern world, such silence lasting a few seconds could be broken by machines, by doctors, by cardiac resuscitation, but in the medieval world there was nothing except despair. If the newborn did not cry at once, everyone looked at one another in fear, and that fear was only allowed to last a single heartbeat. The midwife lifted the baby. Its skin was bluish from the cold and exhaustion. You saw her bend down, press her ear close, then rub 2 fingers over that tiny chest. There were no breathing tubes, no modern tools, only gestures passed down through generations of women hoping to pull the child back from the edge. If luck intervened, a moment later, a cry would burst out, weak, trembling, but enough to let the entire room exhale. In that instant, you would see the mother's shoulder shudder as though a weight had finally lifted. The midwife quickly wrapped the infant in a woolen cloth and placed it near the embers of the hearth, to protect it from the merciless cold outside. In this era, a baby surviving the winter was already a miracle. But if the cry did not come, then another ritual began. The midwife would immediately do what had to be done, baptize the baby on the spot. The child did not need to live. It only needed its final breath to touch the holy water so its soul could be saved. There was no hesitation, no debate. The moment the head appeared, even if only for a few seconds, the rite had to be performed. And if the child still did not return to life, no one screamed, no doctors rushed into the room, no alarm sounded. Infant death in the Middle Ages happened so often that sorrow itself became something adults learned to carry quietly. You would see the older woman silently wrap the tiny body in cloth. No one blamed anyone, not the midwife, not the mother, not God. Silence covered the room as though a candle had simply gone out. The child would be buried before dawn, not because there was no love, but because the fragile body would decay quickly in the damp cold of this land. A shallow grave, a rough wooden cross, a simple prayer. The mother was usually not allowed to go. She had to remain in the birthing room confronting her own grief, physical and spiritual. And if the child lived, the ordeal was far from over. The first days were the most dangerous. The baby's skin was thin, its breath faint, its body easily chilled, its navel easily infected. You would hear the midwife murmuring instructions. Wrap the baby in wool, keep it by the fire, avoid drafts, avoid cold water, avoid the evil eye. All this knowledge was a strange mixture of practical medicine and sacred belief, a blend unique to the Middle Ages, impossible to separate. And so the fate of a child was decided in a few fragile minutes, yet those minutes would stay carved into the memories of the family for years. A single breath became a victory. A single cry became proof that no matter how harsh the world was, life still clung stubbornly to the cracks of candlelight and the thin breaths inside a dark birthing room. You leave that room with a tightness in your throat, not because of the sorrowful scene, but because you realize that medieval people, in all the roughness and injustice of their age, never stopped fighting for life. They had no science, no medicine, but they possessed something incredibly powerful. The determination to pull that child into the world by any means, even when hope was as faint as a single candle in a long winter night. The birthing room, after many hours of struggle, had almost no warmth left. The candle on the wooden table had burned low, its flame swaying each time the midwife moved. Everyone understood that this moment would decide everything, whether it would be the child's first cry or absolute silence. The kind of silence medieval people feared more than the tolling of a death bell. The mother lay on her side, her clothes soaked with cold sweat. The midwife leaned down, her hands experienced yet trembling ever so slightly, as though she knew fate was hanging by the thinnest thread. And then there was a terrible stillness, where all sound disappeared. The room held only the whisper of wind seeping through the thatched roof, a cold so sharp it raised goosebumps on your skin. In the modern world, such silence lasting a few seconds could be reversed by machines, by doctors, by resuscitation. But in the Middle Ages there was nothing but despair. If the baby did not cry immediately, people would look at one another in alarm, and even that worry was allowed to last only the length of a heartbeat. The midwife lifted the child. Its skin was bluish from cold and exhaustion. You saw her bend down, press her ear close, then rub its tiny chest with 2 fingers. There were no breathing tubes, no modern tools, only the gestures passed down through generations of women, hoping to pull a child back from the brink. If fortune was kind, a second later, a cry would break free, faint, trembling, but enough to make the entire room exhale at once. In that moment, you could see the mother's shoulders shudder with relief. The midwife quickly wrapped the baby in a woolen cloth and placed it near the embers of the hearth to protect it from the brutal cold outside. In these times, a newborn surviving the winter was itself a miracle. But if the cry did not come, then another ritual began. The midwife would immediately do what she was obliged to do, perform an emergency baptism. The baby did not have to live. It merely needed its last breath to touch the holy water for its soul to be saved. There was no delay, no debate. The moment its head emerged, even if only for seconds, the rite had to be performed. And if the child still did not return to life, no one screamed, no doctor rushed in, no alarm sounded. Infant death in the Middle Ages happened so often that grief became a quiet, familiar shape in the hearts of adults. You saw the older woman silently wrap the tiny body in cloth. No one blamed anyone, not the midwife, not the mother, not God. Silence settled over the room as the candle had simply gone out. The child would be taken for burial before dawn, not out of lack of emotion, But because such fragile bodies decomposed quickly in the damp cold of this land, a shallow little grave, a rough wooden cross, a simple prayer. The mother was usually not allowed to attend. She had to remain in the birthing room, facing her own pain, physical and spiritual. And if the child lived, the ordeal was far from over. The first days were the most dangerous. Its skin was tender, its breath weak, its body prone to the cold and its navel easily infected. You watch the midwife mutter instructions. Wrap the baby in wool, keep it close to the hearth, avoid draughts, avoid cold water, avoid the evil eye. This knowledge was a strange mixture of empirical practice and sacred belief, a blend unique to the medieval world, impossible to separate. The cruel truth was this: if the mother died in the first week, the child almost certainly would too. There was no milk, no concept of bottles or substitutes. Only rarely would there be another woman in the village who was breastfeeding and could help, the wet nurse. Without her, the child survived only a few days, curled in its thin blanket, breathing ever more faintly until it slipped away. Meanwhile, the father stood outside everything, helpless and distant. He did not fully understand what happened inside this room, where life and death brushed against each other like twin blades. Sometimes he heard his wife's soft groans or the child's weak cries, but he was not allowed to enter. Medieval society saw childbirth as a world for women, and only for women. Men stood outside like gatekeepers, unaware that inside that dark room 2 lives were being held in suspension. The first nights were endless. You saw the mother try to breastfeed, her hands trembling from exhaustion, her eyes sunken with pain. There were no painkillers, no nurses on duty, only the silent endurance passed down by ancestors. The child suckled a few weak mouthfuls before falling asleep from sheer fatigue. Its breaths were as thin as spider threads, as if a single breeze could blow them away. And then, day by day, if fortune stayed with them, the mother's breathing became steadier. The fever receded. The child kept its eyes open longer, its cries grew stronger. The midwife held the mother's hand and whispered what was considered the greatest blessing of the age. She has survived the first week. A simple sentence, yet enough to make the whole family exhale, as though they had stepped away from a cliff's edge. Because in the medieval world, surviving childbirth was never guaranteed. It was a victory, a fragile but precious one, paid for with tears, pain and fear lingering on every breath. And you, standing in that room, could feel that life in these times did not bloom gently. It had to push, fight, and tear its way back from death bit by bit. When the first week ended, only then did the family truly believe the child had a chance to enter this turbulent world. And the mother, though exhausted, had stepped away from the gate of death once again, in the most literal sense. The birthing room, after many hours of struggle, has almost no warmth left. The candle on the wooden table burns low, its flame wavering each time the midwife moves. Everyone understands that this moment will decide everything. A first cry of life, or absolute silence. The kind of silence that medieval people feared more than the tolling of a funeral bell. The mother lies on her side, her clothes damp with cold sweat. The midwife leans down. Her hands are experienced, yet they tremble ever so slightly, as though she knows fate is now hanging by the thinnest thread. And then, there is a terrible stillness, a moment in which all sound vanishes. The room holds nothing but the wind seeping through the gaps in the roof. A sound so cold it sends goosebumps across your skin. In the modern world, that silence lasting a few seconds could be broken by machines, doctors, or resuscitation. But in the medieval world, there is nothing except despair. If the child does not cry at once, people look at each other in fear, and that fear is allowed to last only for a single heartbeat. The midwife lifts the baby. Its skin is bluish from cold and exhaustion. You see her bend down, place her ear close, then use 2 fingers to rub the tiny chest. There is no breathing tube, no medical apparatus, only the gestures passed down from countless women before her, hoping to pull a child back from the edge. If luck is with them, a moment later, a cry breaks out. Faint, trembling, but enough to make the whole room exhale in relief. In that instant, you see the mother's shoulder shudder as if a weight has fallen away. The midwife quickly wraps the baby in a wool blanket and places it near the embers of the hearth to shield it from the merciless cold outside. In this age, a newborn surviving winter is already a miracle. But if the cry does not come, then another ritual begins. The midwife must do what needs to be done. Baptize the infant on the spot. The child does not need to live. Only its final breath must touch holy water for its soul to be saved. There is no hesitation, no debate. The moment the head emerges, even if only for a few seconds, the rite must be performed. And if the child still does not return to life, no one screams, no doctor rushes in, no alarms blare. Infant death in the medieval world is so common that sorrow becomes something adults carry without protest. You watch the older woman silently wrap the tiny body in cloth. No one blames anyone, not the midwife, not the mother, not God. Silence covers the room, as though a single candle has just gone out. The child will be buried before dawn, not out of callousness, but because its fragile body decays too quickly in the damp cold of this land. A shallow grave, a rough wooden cross, a simple prayer. The mother is usually not allowed to attend. She must remain in the birthing room facing her own pain, both of the body and of the soul, and if the child lives, the trial is not yet over. The first days are the most dangerous. Skin too delicate, breath too weak, body easily chilled, navel easily infected. You watch the midwife mutter instructions, wrap the child in wool, keep it close to the fire, avoid drafts, avoid cold water, avoid the evil eye. All this knowledge is a strange blend of practical medicine and spiritual belief, an inseparable mixture that defines medieval life. The brutal truth is this: if the mother dies in the first week, the child is almost certain to die as well. There is no milk, no concept of bottles or formula. Only occasionally might there be a woman in the village still nursing her own child who can help, a wet nurse. Without her, the infant lives only a few days more, curled in a thin blanket, its breath weakening until it fades. Meanwhile, the father stands outside it all, powerless and distant. He does not fully grasp what is happening in this room where life and death cross like twin blades. Sometimes he hears his wife's soft groans or the faint cry of the child, yet he cannot enter. In the medieval mind, childbirth belongs to women and only to women. Men stand outside like gatekeepers, unaware that inside the darkened room, the fate of 2 lives hangs suspended. The first nights feel endless. You watch the mother try to breastfeed, hands trembling with exhaustion, eyes sunken with pain. There is no pain relief, no nurse, only the quiet endurance passed down by ancestors. The baby nurses a little, then sleeps from weakness. Each breath is thin as a thread, fragile enough to be blown away by the slightest breeze. And then, as the days pass, if fortune is kind, The mother's breathing steadies. The fever retreats. The baby opens its eyes longer, and its cries grow stronger. The midwife takes the mother's hand and whispers the words considered the greatest blessing of this age. She has survived the first week. A simple sentence, but enough to make the entire household breathe again, as though they have stepped back from a precipice. Because in the medieval world, surviving childbirth is not a given. It is a victory. A small, fragile victory earned through tears, pain, and fear hovering over every breath. And you, standing in that room, can feel that life in this age does not bloom gently. It claws its way into the world, snatching every inch from the grasp of death. When the first week ends, only then does the family truly believe the child has a chance in this storm-ridden world. And the mother, though drained, has stepped away from the threshold of death once more, in the most literal sense. In those tense hours of childbirth, you almost forget that beyond the wooden door another person is waiting. A man, the husband, the father, but standing at the farthest edge of this sacred moment. In the Middle Ages he had no chair beside the bed, no hand to hold his wife's, no words he was allowed to speak to comfort her. Childbirth belonged entirely to the realm of women, and men were pushed outside like unnecessary figures whose place had been fixed by centuries of tradition. You glance through the gap in the door and see him standing still, his hands clasped tightly together, occasionally glancing toward the dark room where his wife is struggling between life and death. No one tells him anything. He is not permitted to know what is happening, not allowed to see the child, not allowed to hear cries for help. All he has is the faint echo of chaos, hurried footsteps, heavy breaths, whispered words exchanged among the women inside. These sounds strike his mind like hammer blows, yet he cannot go forward, nor can he walk away. A man's role during these hours is painfully simple: waiting. And waiting, in a world like the Middle Ages, is a trial of its own. A thin wooden door can be the dividing line between celebration and mourning. If the cry of a newborn rings out, it is a blessing. If not, he must prepare for something else. The shroud, the funeral candles, the priest. Some villages believed that men brought bad luck into the birthing chamber, so forbidding them to enter was not only tradition, but a deep-seated supernatural fear. Other communities were more practical. Birthing rooms were too small, too hot, too chaotic, and a man's presence only added to the confusion. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. The father was pushed to the margins, lost at the very moment that would shape his family's future. You see his discomfort when the village women walk past him. They know more than he does, understand more than he does, and they have the right to enter a place he cannot. In a patriarchal society, these were among the rare moments when men had to step aside, and perhaps that frightened them even more than the winter cold. Once the baby is born, the events that follow do not require much from the father either. He is called only when it's time to sign the baptism record or stand before the priest to confirm the child's name. In some communities, if the mother dies, the father is not allowed to touch her body. That task belongs to the women of the village, and if the child dies, there is only one duty left for him: digging the grave. It is not that they were heartless. They were simply shut out of a process in which they should have been participants. Tradition, religion, and collective fear turned men into shadowy figures outside the birthing room, present yet absent. Some regions even built birthing huts, separate structures where women gave birth so that impurity would not enter the main house. That meant the father stood not only outside the room, but outside the entire hut, under the night sky and the biting wind. Sometimes he held an oil lamp, lighting the small path toward the cemetery, just in case it was needed before dawn, and when everything ended, whether with a cry or with silence, he entered the room in a tentative way. Slow, small steps, as if afraid he might shatter the fragile air clinging to the walls. He looked at his wife, at his child, or at the empty cloth. There were no dramatic emotional outbursts like those of the modern world, no joyful cheering, no tender first moment of holding his newborn. Only calmness, endurance, and acceptance, the natural rhythm of life in that era. Standing beside this man, you notice something striking about his world. Even though the rules forbade him from participating, his fear, his love, and his worry were no less than anyone else's. He simply had to carry all of it from the other side of the door. A place where dim candlelight and the wind seeping through wooden walls turned every emotion into something quieter, heavier, and more suffocating. In the Middle Ages, the father was not the hero of the childbirth story, but he was not an uncaring outsider either. He was the patient silhouette waiting in the shadows, clinging to a fragile hope while his entire world hung in the breath of the two people behind that closed door. And the truth is that, no matter the era, the gate of birth is also the gate of death. From the pitch-dark rooms of distant centuries to the bright, sterile hospital wards of today, the act of a woman bringing a new life into the world has always meant walking the thinnest boundary between life and death. In the Middle Ages, that boundary was even more fragile. There were no medicines, no machines, only the mother's faint, trembling breaths, the experienced hands of the midwife, and prayers mingling with the slow, smoky burn of herbs. And even though the world then was harsh enough to swallow any glimmer of hope, those women still stepped into childbirth with a quiet strength that history rarely praises. They bore pain, risked everything, and shouldered fear they were not allowed to speak aloud. They gave birth in shuttered rooms, in the chill of winter, surrounded by whispered pleas for life. And still they endured. It was from that endurance, from that refusal to let go of life's fragile thread, that tiny angels were able to arrive in this world at all. Today, even though the world has changed, that story remains just as true, because every mother, whether medieval or modern, must pass through a door no one else can walk through on her behalf. She accepts danger, gives up her own safety, and pours all her strength into allowing a small, helpless being to utter its first cry. And for that, we should love them more, understand them more, honour them more, because every child who makes it into this world is a miracle bought with determination, with endurance, and with a kind of love no other sacrifice can compare to. Sleep well, my dear friends. I'll see you again in the next story.